let's crank up the heat because it's time for another batch of roasty, toasty hot takes. Hopefully enough to keep us warm for the coming winter, am I right? Okay, so let's dive right into it. Starting with... Cassini writes, I'll just repost a hot take I had for the puppet-centric video. Lefty is an incredibly uninteresting and uncreative design that doesn't work in any context. The concept of being an animatronic built specifically to capture the puppet is so interesting as there's so many challenges that poses. Like, how is this puppet capturing animatronic going to find the puppet and transport it back, all without getting seen in public? How is it going to effectively capture and restrain a supernatural being such as the puppet? The design for Lefty does nothing with any of these questions. Instead, he's just a black and red bear. It would have been far more interesting had it been some kind of experimental endoskeleton maybe. Something along the lines of the Mimic would actually really work here. But these are just my thoughts. And I agree, especially if it was something that kind of was kept in the back room and snuck out on one of the last nights and that wasn't supposed to be on stage. An endoskeleton, one that had like a cage-like frame that you could see the puppet through it, strung up. That would actually be really neat and kind of creepy. My problem with Lefty, and I say this as I'm currently staring at my Lefty statue that is sitting on my puppet shelf right above my computer, it comes down to two things. One, he is a reskin of Rockstar Freddy, whose design I think it's a totally passable design, but I wouldn't consider it anything, like, huge. And secondly, if this is the newest form of the puppet, if this is what the puppet must be in, could we have some more puppet accentuation on it? I mean, could he have striped arms? Could he have tear marks? Imagine if Lefty had, like, purple oozing out of his eye holes and down his face. Just something a little more interesting. Because as far as Lefty is, Lefty sticks out kind of as a sore thumb amongst the other scrapped animatronics. You got Scrap Trap, who looks a little goofy, but is still pretty creepy. You've got Scrap Baby, who is very creepy with her dummy mouth and broken face and giant claw. You've got Molten Freddy, who is literally falling apart at the seams. And then you've got this Freddy. This recolored Freddy bear. And the puppet is inside of it, but you wouldn't be able to tell unless you looked at blueprints. But, so I agree. Zaffaran writes, this is not a hot take, I don't think so, but I have to release my anger. Warning, this might be an incomprehensible ramble. Edwin should not exist, along with David and stuff. Edwin existing directly harms both William and Henry's character and future character development. Just to let you know, I'm completely ignoring the books and going on Will and Henry's game character. We know nothing about Henry in terms of personality and how he felt about those close to him. We obviously know he hates William now and feels remorse for not helping his daughter and seems to care about her, although that's up for debate because of Lefty's existence and the fact that presumably a 3 to 6-year-old was left by herself. Apart from that, Henry's character is very undeveloped. Now Edwin comes in and he has a bunch of lore relevance as apparently he made the classics, which ruins the fact that Will and Henry were said to be geniuses and very skilled engineers and mechanics. And we know how he felt about David, his inner struggles, and we even know his wife. Edwin robbed my poor boy Henry of his character. We don't even know how Henry felt about William before he went cuckoo apart from they were friends. The Mimic wasn't a bad idea. I saw a video that the Mimic could have been made by Henry instead, and that's 10 times better. Henry could have made the Mimic for Charlotte to look after her, as he would be too busy. Right off the bat, we'd already know he was perhaps neglecting Charlotte, but still cared about her being taken care of. Anyway, after she dies, it starts mimicking Charlotte, and Henry feels horrible, so destroys it, showing us his remorse and maybe even how he was prone to outbursts. This could have given us a nice character development timeline, as he's very stoic and almost depressed in FNAF 6, showing how all the events of FNAF had their toll on him, and now he doesn't feel that big range of emotions. Then he plops the Mimic in the safe room, and it continues to watch whatever happens in there, murder, and mentally log it. Eventually, Henry and/or might gather everything related to Freddy's, including the Mimic, to burn it all. Then the VR people found its chip, and yada 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 security breach. Tell me why Henry was robbed like this. It was already bad enough not knowing about him until FNAF 6, but when we do know him, that's all we got? Not to mention the main baddie of FNAF, William, isn't developed. Now, I don't want William or Henry to come back, obviously. Those dudes can rest, or more like suffer if you're William. I just maybe want a flashback game that focuses on the bloody founders of the franchise. If we had a Fredbear's Family Diner game, Steelwool could have easily made it so the Mimic appears in it, but we focus more on Henry, William, and their kids' characters. Anyway, I hate Edwin because of what he robbed from us. I honestly wouldn't have half the problems I do now with Fnaf's writing if the Mimic was made by Henry and Edwin didn't exist. Like, come on, Henry and William don't need a third major player in their early company. It tears away from the fact they're brilliant engineers with the fact they contracted Edwin. Anyway, too long didn't read. I'm angry because we got a flashback game that's important, and instead of fleshing out already established characters, especially Henry, they made a new one to give all their attention to. Plus, that new guy actually ruined established character for those established characters. So, I think you clocked the problem. But it isn't Edwin. It's Henry. The fact that we know so little about Game Henry that establishing a new character reminds us that we know nothing about Henry is an issue, but it's not an issue with Edwin. If Henry was a fully fleshed out character, then not only would Edwin's appearance not step on his toes, but we would be able to fully say whether or not Henry would or wouldn't do what William A. did in Secret of the Mimic. Which we can't because we simply don't know him. And the thing is, when we do learn more about Henry, such as in the books, it's always secondhand, or at least it feels like it. And honestly, we don't know much about Henry from the books either, since apparently all of Charlie's memories are of a Henry who, from the description of Charlie's creation, was bat spit off his rocker at the time. And as for being someone who would ignore Will's atrocities for years, well, yeah, going off his own words, he would. In Pizzeria Simulator, I mean. Edwin is a new character who actually got a storyline in building, up against Henry, whose entire deal had to be assumed by the fandom because it wasn't there. Because he was only revealed in the game he died in, and that's not Steelwool's fault. That was Scott's decision. Scott decided to have Henry killed off in the games and already dead in the books. If he wanted to rectify that by bringing Henry back, then he could. But that would probably break the fandom's image of Henry, likely, because some of the stuff we know about Henry, we don't actually know. We know Henry says,
"Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable."
And folks have taken that as him being the one who created all the Freddys from the very beginning and all the animatronics. But is that true? Does he just mean the classic animatronics? Obviously, he built some version of the Springlock suits that were different from Edwin's. But does that mean his were perfected? Was he really a genius? We know from the books, at least, that William, while being some sort of a genius, was also a huge fraudster. And he scammed over everyone, so that fits pretty well. The bottom line is this. Edwin is a good character, and the fact that he was revealed in this game and he has this story that's full and complete and fleshed out and his family has a story is on the whole a good thing. The problem with Henry is a problem with Henry. It's not a problem with Edwin. The Fishy Rune writes, "I don't know when the next hot take will be, but since this is on my mind and I have no clue if you talked about it or not, I just want to put it here. Plus, I am going to forget it if I don't write it down. FNAF's perfect ending is FNAF 3. The good ending is freeing all the souls in the body of the animatronics, letting the missing children finally be at rest. William was stuck in his trap, the one place that made him feel invincible but turned out to be his prison. In my opinion, the fire should have killed William right then and there, alongside the puppet. The fourth game could be a prequel to the main events, even though I don't think it shares as much history besides just the family diner. I think the books made the entire lore confusing and went against what Scott said that to understand the story, you just need to play the 4 games. I think having the stories as their own continuity, but having similar things to the games is fine, but I feel like it got to the point after FNAF 4 where to understand who the characters was and the story, you had to read the books. So I personally think FNAF 3 should have been the ending and not keep going for another batch of games. I agree with almost all of what you're saying, but I'm going to spin it in a slightly different way. So, I don't think FNAF 3 was the perfect ending for FNAF, but I do agree that it was probably the best ending for that first segment of the story. I think we've talked about it before, but the idea of the purple guy and William Afton could have been different characters, might have actually helped Fnaf. The crazy killer and the mad scientist, that could have led into future games, where the story doesn't have to constantly rely on the old games. If it was just for that beginning story, yes, ending at 3 would have been great, but if it was for the franchise, ending at 3 wouldn't have been the perfect shining ending, because really, think of all the good stuff that came after it, and then think of an obscure point-and-click franchise that had 3 games and then stopped. There certainly wouldn't have been a movie, I can tell you that much. But honestly, now that the books thing has been somewhat confirmed, that the books and games don't have to be 100% canon to each other, and you don't need to consume one to understand the other, the story isn't nearly as confusing. Like, the only things confusing with Secret of the Mimic are things that you kind of have to really, think deeply into. Like, the moon.exe, you became the sun and moon line. If you start thinking about it, oh whoa, slippery slope. But you don't have to do that. It's just a piece of a part of a bigger story. And in Secret of the Mimic, at least, that story is available without searching too deeply. Gato Batez writes, while I am excited for Secret of the Mimic, I can't ignore the visuals and lighting of the game. I feel all of Steel Wool's models and environments have this plastic smooth look to it, like the Minecraft texture pack, and it doesn't really match with Scott's art style. Everything is too clean and modern, and it really takes away from what's supposed to be scary. Another complaint, the previous game's atmospheres don't work either, as you can clearly see what's in front of you and what's miles away. I can see the argument that it's just their art style, but it seems they're trying to be realistic and cartoony at the same time, and majority of the time it doesn't work. This take was made before the game came out, but I'm going to act like it's a critique on the art style of the game since it didn't change before release and since the hot take is addressing it as a whole. And I have a little bit of mixed feelings on this. On the first half, I do partially agree, and this goes for Steel Wool and Illumix. I remember in Help Wanted and Fnaf AR, a lot of the plush body animatronics got this slick, plasticky look, such as with the puppet, who looks almost like Velveteen in Fnaf 2, and then in Help Wanted got this rubbery skin. I personally prefer the softer look, the more fluffy texture, but otherwise, I think the mix of cartoon and realism actually works pretty well. With the FNAF characters like they are, if the humans or environments were any more realistic, the animatronics would start to stick out like a big sore thumb. It wouldn't work the same way as in the FNAF movie, because for one, the games would never get to the point where they would look as real as the FNAF movie, at least not currently. Basically, it's more immersive like this, with everything on the same level. For me, at least, realistic graphics don't really matter when it comes to immersion unless they get wonky. Also, visual clarity is a big thing for me. I would rather see what's coming than be wandering around unable to see anything, largely because the fear of the unknown doesn't entirely work on me. It only worked when Party Time Chica vanished because I had already seen her. But like Amnesia the Bunker, I was a lot more creeped out when I saw the ghoul. I would rather be able to see and be scared than be squinting and trying to figure out where I'm walking. The White Tiger's boss battle actually did this well because while I got a little annoyed with the tiger, and while it was in almost complete darkness, I could always see and differentiate. I didn't see where I was going, but I always saw when I got there. Slaphead writes, I mean, this isn't necessarily a hot take, more so an observation, but I do find it weird that FNAF is mainly marketed towards children. Given the subject matter, it's absolutely insane that this is just a normal thing for a kid to be into. Not just with this series, but with what children consume as a whole. My ex's kids are obsessed with FNAF to a worrying degree. I got into FNAF in 2014 when I was 11 or 12. Things like Goosebumps or Courage the Cowardly Dog have always and will always exist and be marketed towards kids, which I don't necessarily have a problem with as long as it's not too much for a child to handle. And getting kids interested in books and reading like FNAF does is always a good thing. I just think there needs to be some sort of boundary for what we directly market towards children to make sure we're not causing them too much mental harm. And I agree, though honestly on the whole, it's a tricky line to cross, but I do think when kids get about 11 or 12, they do start getting into that PG-13 area early. They want to upgrade to something more intense, and with FNAF, I think for the most part it can work since it's more teen-oriented than mature. It works for a kid who's trying to leave the comfort zone of cartoons, thinking they're babyish, and go into something that still carries similar vibes to the things that they were into as a kid, but now seems aimed towards an older demographic. It's got an edge to it. Upgrading from Sonic the Hedgehog to Shadow, but I think you have a good point, especially when I see things like the books being marketed towards kids below the 5th grade. Many of the Fazbear Tales stories would be totally acceptable as Goosebumps. But there's always those few that are a little not, and I don't exactly mean just the impreg one. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what FNAF does, kids are probably going to be into it no matter what. I mean, it doesn't really help that they make plushies that are in the children's aisle. But at the end of the day, the person who has the most influence on what their kid absorbs is the parents. Kids' tolerance is also very different depending on the child. And I say this coming up with an example. So, this summer, I went to go see Final Destination Bloodlines. It is a gruesome movie, so it's great. Oof, MRI machines. They're new fear unlocked, but a very unlikely fear too. Just if something starts beeping, move out of the way. But I digress. The more important part was, when I was settling in to watch Bloodlines, a family of 5 came in. And it was actually a family of 7, with 5 kids that ranged anywhere from about 12 to the youngest girl looked maybe like she could have been 6 or 7. And they sat behind me, and they sat down, and they watched what I would consider to be a very gory movie. I mean, Final Destination is sort of more of like an existential fear than spooky monsters, but it was very gory. And those kids seemed to handle it well. I didn't hear any screams from back there. They walked out at the end of the movie, that's all. But either before or after that, because I can't remember when it came out, I went to go see Looney Tunes, The Day the Earth Blew Up. There was a family there. They had a little girl. I don't know how old she was. I saw them as they were leaving, but she got scared of the gum monster that pops up about halfway through the movie because I heard her parents whispering, because for some reason they were like sitting very close to me. And they got up and they left in the middle of the movie and they didn't come back. And that's not shaming that kid. The gum monster was very creepy. But I will say that kids are different. Some kids can handle watching people getting chopped into bits and crushed and smushed and a bunch of really gory, gross stuff. And some kids get really freaked out of this chomping giant gum monster. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. But yeah, no, maybe taking your young children to see Final Destination Bloodlines wasn't a really good idea, because all of those kids now are going to be carrying with them that same horrendous fear of logging trucks that has been plaguing the nation for like 15, 20 years now. Oh, by the way, if you have any young kids, don't take them to see The Long Walk. The Long Walk is great. It is, to quote a reviewer, it is the best movie I am never going to watch again.
To clarify, because it hurts.
Ryan Isma writes, "It's not a hot take, more just delusion, but I refuse to accept the first games are just games in universe idea. Narratively, I adore the original storyline, and I'm blind to evidence that it's not real. I also refuse to accept any evidence that the happiest day doesn't end with the kids' souls moving on. In a world where we have souls, agony, and remnant as sources of supernatural power, I choose to believe that happiest day is so happy because the souls got to be free. Whatever is left over can keep haunting the animatronics, sure, but those kids are free." Honestly, yeah, I refuse to accept it too. When I'm under the impression that Fazbear Entertainment is saying that all of those events were just games and had nothing to do with real life, and that's not true. That actually really did happen in canon, and that's just Fazbear Entertainment trying to cover it up, just like with Fazbear Frights in FNAF 3. So I don't take what they say in Help Wanted 1 about those just being fake games and nothing real to actually be the truth. That's just a lie fabricated by FazEnt. As for the happiest day, Yeah, I hope the kids moved on. I hope that there's one angry child who's still lurking about, and all of this haunted matter is not those kids, because those kids have gone through enough. They need to get out of Fazbear Hills and just move on to the Pearly Gates. Get them away from Afton. There is absolutely no reason that they should be kept anywhere near Afton. Moving on, though. Emerald Bryce writes, as a newer fan who only really got on board around the time of Security Breach and who learned most of my FNAF info from my friend who's been a fan from the very beginning, it honestly feels like trying to genuinely solve or understand the full story of the first 6 games is pointless, especially if you try to tie them into the new story. Convoluted and overwhelming mess I won't even get into here. There are still so many unknowns, vague details we think we understand, but can't be certain of, and retcons where we aren't sure what was or wasn't retconned. And Scott has made it clear he isn't going to outright answer anything else because the story is all there. I'd rather treat new FNAF canon as a separate story and use headcanons to craft my own versions of the original story because it feels way more manageable and means the constant retcons and additions that make it more confusing don't matter. Hope this was a good take. P.S. Love your videos. Been watching since a little after joining the fandom, and they're always a treat. Hey, thanks. I think you have a really good point there. If Scott says that the story is all there, and it doesn't need any more clarification, then why not take what story is there and come up with your own headcanons? There's a pretty good chance that what you come up with won't get discredited. And if it does, you can always just move your headcanons around. Or if it's something that's just the fandom's kind of like going back and forth about, like the new Charlie 83-87 debate, maybe just you don't have to engage with it. Sometimes it's simpler and easier to just take what you have taken from the series, craft that together into what story you think you saw, and just try to enjoy that. And I say that because there are a lot of lingering questions in FNAF that likely are not going to be answered. And that's an issue, but if you can still craft a story around that and have a good time, you know what? Nothing wrong with that. Richard Palfy writes, Vanessa is not only one of the most underutilized characters in the franchise, but honestly, she's probably beyond salvaging at this point. Ruin had so much potential to redeem her as a character, but we got nothing. Show us her and Gregory trapping M2 and her growing a backbone? Nah, that's an off-screen event that we never see. Her growing a backbone as she stands up to her tormentor? Never shown, only told as Candy Cadet's exposition in Help Wanted 2. They can't even explore the shared body scenario anymore as Security Breach's canon ending is Princess Quest and Vanny seems to be a completely separate entity now. She has no character arc, absolutely nothing. All we have is her infamously horrible personality and base Security Breach. And while everyone's optimistic about the 3-star family, let's face it, Vanessa would not be a good mom, in stark contrast to how the fandom likes to portray her. Her past and present trauma, plus her horrible base game personality, made it very unlikely that she and Gregory might have had a healthy relationship. People often portray her as someone like Pomni or Poppy, a traumatized but emotionally mature woman who wants to do the right thing, cares for people, and stands up to her tormentor, but that's just not what we see in canon, and everything afterwards is only roughly implied. So unless we see some retcons, rewrites, or an expansion to her personality and screen time, or really explore her, I don't see even the 3-star family happening all that much. Oh yes, this is one of those spots where the fanon is doing some heavy lifting. Vanessa has just been so slice and dice that it's extremely difficult to get a read on her, especially since we see 2 of her, the meek bunny in the therapy tapes and the woman yelling at Freddy for falling on stage, likely making Roxy cry too, and yelling at Gregory calling him a monster when, yeah, she's very aware of Vanny. One headcanon I've heard is that the possession is changing her personality, and I could buy that. But the problem is that we don't see enough of that to confirm it. In fact, if Vanessa Vanny is a parallel with Sun and Moon, which I sort of think they are, this sourness could just be stressed out Vanessa. And the problem with that is that we just don't see anything else. And yeah, now there is some implication, especially in Help Wanted 2's cut lines, that Vanny and Vanessa might be splitting into 2 different characters, which takes away a huge part of Vanessa's agency. It leaves her empty, story-wise more than anything. And yeah, no backbone, no sun. And yeah, the 3-star family is likely going to be carried on Freddy's non-existent back. I mean, it's possible that Vanessa could be a good big sister figure to Gregory, but I don't know. And no, I don't think I would compare her to Pomni or Poppy. Poppy is, if I may be so blunt, sussy as hell. I'm not saying she's evil, but I do feel like there's something we don't know about her, and I find the situation with Safe Haven to be a little, let's just say something's rotten in Denmark. And Pomni, nah. Pomni starts out the series as pretty anxious, kind of out of it, easily shaken, but as the show goes along, not only does she open up and learns, but puts herself out there to be a rock for others. To the point where by the newer episodes, she's mostly embraced the craziness and seems to not be having a terrible time. That's too much character for Vanessa. But can Vanessa be fixed? It would be hard. I mean, it would be difficult. To fix this, Vanessa would need more screen time. She would need to at least get one big moment where we saw her doing some stuff and saw her interacting with someone other than just like a tape recorder. But even then, it would be hard to make up for all the lost time. You could, but it would take some work. That one writes, so I don't know how hot this is, but I feel like Fnaf is in a sort of slump right now. It seems a little confused on the tone at once, and like it's maybe struggling to mature with its audience. So here's my take. I think it would actually be a great idea to make a new chain to your chair type game set in the week before Security Breach. It would fit in some gaps, maybe give some actual weight to the bonding situation, and what's more, it would let us actually get Vanny on screen for more than like 3 minutes. It would be a sort of return of form for the people who prefer 1-6 gameplay, and what's more, it would make room for some sorely needed characterization. This is another one of those ones that I half agree with, because I think that a short game before Security Breach that kind of ties up all those loose ends, maybe explains to us what was going on with Gregory, entirely confirmation, and what Vanessa and Vanny were doing, and how their wavelength works, and stuff like that. I think that would be great, because there's a lot of stuff that we don't have cleared up. But with the Office gameplay, so I'm a little more torn on that. And by that, I don't mean that I don't think we should ever go back to the Office, but like this. First of all, I don't really think FNAF is in a slump. I think it's in a transition. But I do think Secret and the Mimic was a step in the right direction. And I think FNAF's back up on its feet. It's not walking with a broken ankle. Don't take kids to go see The Long Walk. But as for a new Office game, I don't dislike the Office gameplay. And I know a lot of people want one of these shorter Office-based games, and that would actually be great. I just don't think it would or should replace a mainline game. That would be a pretty big step back in a way. It's a different style of game, you get me? It would mean things like taking a game that, how long is Secret of the Mimic? I think I played through Secret of the Mimic in let's say 8 to 9 hours for a singular playthrough. And then you have the original FNAF games, and they were maybe 30 minutes to an hour through playthrough. You have one game that is an open world for the most part, where you walk around and go through rooms and have animatronics chase you. And you have another one where you're kind of confined to a chair and you open and close doors and check cameras. And these two types of games have tried to merge together before in Security Breach, and that did not go very well. It worked much better in Help Wanted. I mean, when Help Wanted works, I've been having a heck of a time trying to get the flat mode version to cooperate. TLDR, I think a new Office-style game would be neat, but I don't think it should replace a main game considering the gameplay style and possible length. The Office gameplay could wear out its welcome pretty quickly, which is why past games usually had their lengths in check. None of them seemed to go on any longer than they needed to. And also, more importantly, I'm not entirely sure if we'd get all of the story info we need if we went totally back to roots, phone call, tape, end of night minigames. But this could be adjusted and this could work. But I don't necessarily know if going back to the Office is really going to scratch the itch or not. We'll see. Emily Cookie writes, if I may share my hot takes. 1. I find it fascinating and very funny how out of character most depictions of the daycare attendant are in the fandom. Their personalities are woobified and morphed. Artwork of them are basically redesigns. Their fan stories go off the rails, and there are too many AUs to count. I'm not saying any of this is bad. It's fine to take a character and run with them, and a lot of the redesigns and stories are very good. But the fan interpretations and original are not the same character, and people tend to forget that. I definitely get what you mean. If you're coming into the fandom for the first time, you might notice a pretty big difference in between the canon and fanon versions of the daycare attendant, especially when it comes to, like, the many fan characters that have popped up around him. But it's important to keep in mind first off that a lot of the AUs were built off of Security Breach and going off of what was seen there. So Sassy Sun wasn't around yet, and when he did show up, his fanon interpretation was pretty beloved. That's a part of fanon, you know? Building alternate versions of adored characters. And I think it boils down to a place of love. Soften the character's design to make them look more like the sweetheart they imagine him as. Try to give a character with a brutal story of exhaustion, corruption, and lobotomizing a story where things didn't have to go so terribly wrong. I understand it, and I respect the fandom that bloomed from it because it's kept the daycare attendant alive. I solely believe that the daycare attendant wouldn't be getting so much merch or attention or any of that if he didn't have such a thriving fandom that adores him. But there is one drawback, and that could be that maybe someone, I'm not saying everyone, might be so into the fanon version that they don't see some of the perks of the abrasive son that was introduced in Help Wanted 2. A son that I personally prefer because it humanizes him so well as an exhausted babysitter who is never off the clock and always fighting off his warped half. But it's not like egregious mischaracterization, like how for a while the Ghost Children were seen as pure villains, or how Elizabeth Afton is sometimes framed as this brat when she was actually another victim of Afton's. But on the whole, yeah, I've noticed it, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's a fandom embracing a softer side of an otherwise tragic character and usually giving them a happier ending compared to what they actually got. And I think that it's great that he's getting a lot of love. 2. It irks me that people assume Vanny becomes a mother figure to Gregory. Just because she's a woman, fans assume that she has motherly instincts. Stick a kid with a female guardian and boom, she is mom and only mom. I prefer her to have a role like a big sister or aunt, as those have a lot more wiggle room and don't shove her in a mom-shaped box. Oh, I agree. I don't necessarily think a woman in her position would be a quick-to-mom figure. I mean, think about it. She had a rough childhood, including a manipulative parent, then she gets possessed by someone who was a lot like her parent, except willing to break fingers, likely was forced to kill a couple of people. Vanessa is already not in a great state of mind, and now she's taking in a little boy to raise? Yeah, I'd say the more likely outcome would be like a sisterly sort of thing. Especially since Gregory's not like a little kid. I mean, maybe if he was a baby, but you get it. But to play devil's advocate, we did kinda give Freddy the dad role too, when he had just really only just met Gregory. So it might not be because of Vanessa's gender in this case, but just that instinctual feeling that we've gotta get this kid some parents. John O'Shea writes, the White Tiger in Secret of the Mimics boss fight wasn't that good. No, I did not play the game, so I might be wrong. But from Daco, Johnny the Night Guard, and your video, it does not even look that fun. But am I wrong? Please shout out me and you, dog. I'm John and he's Chip. Thank you. Bye. Shout outs to both John and Chip. Thank you for the hot take. Now, so yeah, the White Tiger boss fight was a little bit annoying. I think it might have been a little buggy the first time I played it. But actually on the second or third go, it wasn't so bad. It was more so that first time going through it when I didn't really understand what I was doing, where it was kind of frustrating. And I know they patched it, though I've seen some people say that the patch has actually made the boss fight a little harder. But in my experience, it was much better. Okay, so this one I actually saved because I didn't remember this one thing they mentioned. Winds of Spring System writes, Scott, when making the Twisted Ones in the fourth closet just made 2 separate AUs based off the Silver Eyes, but then turned around and went, no, wait, we need to tie it more to the Silver Eyes, and butchered both stories with the Silver Eyes and just went, Fnaf fans won't read the finer text of it, as there are discrepancies between the Twisted Ones and the Silver Eyes. Charlie internally saying something along the lines of, Dave showed off his scars to me, which is how she knows about the springlock wounds, which never happened in the Silver Eyes, as an example. Actually, yeah, I didn't remember that, but that is a huge plot hole. In the Twisted Ones, the whole reason Clay brings Charlie in is because she needs to walk around and look at the bodies and be able to identify springlock wound marks. But she sees Dave's scar just on the back of his neck, but she doesn't see his full body scars. And when he is springlock failed and he is mangled, she doesn't see the scars then either because, of course, they're under the suit. The one who saw that was Carlton. But, of course, Carlton's not in this book. And it does feel very odd. There are some other discrepancies that I've noticed throughout the 3 books. There are some weird things. Things like how at the end of the Silver Eyes, it's very strongly implied. Well, no, it's basically said that Charlie and John walk into the graveyard together. And then the fourth closet, not Charlie is like, well, you saw the graves, didn't you? And John's like, no, I stopped. I let you go in alone. Which kind of feels like a retcon just to fix that in. There's other stuff too, like I've mentioned this dumb little hyperfixation thing again, where John's staring at Stanley on the floor, and then he suddenly stops staring at Stanley and starts talking about Charlie's closet, and after some exposition, he's looking down at Stanley again, musing over him. There's also bigger things, like if Charlie spent most of her childhood as a tripod, which is heavily implied by the fourth closet, how on earth was she a Girl Scout for as long as she was? I guess that must have happened after Henry died, but still, why, if Aunt Jen knew that Charlie wasn't going to get past teenhood, why on earth was she so fixated on teaching her how to be independent and get her out of the house that fast? Did she just want to, get rid of her? Wait, actually, she kind of did, didn't she? She got Charlie out of the house, and the second Charlie got out of the house, she moved. Okay, that's not a plot hole. That's just Aunt Jen being a great parental figure. But yeah, I absolutely, because especially since it started out as 1 book and became 3, and how Charlie's treated, I definitely think that The Silver Eyes was its own complete book. And then they wanted to do a trilogy, kind of like Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Divergence, list about 5 more of those because they were really popular for a while. Gubsy writes, reposting from a previous community post, apologies if you've already seen it. Dayshift at Freddy's 3 is by far the least interesting game in the series, and it is the complete antithesis of what Dayshift at Freddy's is supposed to be about. What I found so entertaining about the original game was how it was designed from the ground up purely for the sake of taking the kiss. Absolutely nothing is taken seriously. There are references to pop culture and extremely dated internet memes, even by the time of the game's release, around every corner. I know some find it to be too overwhelming, especially regarding some of its edgier humor, but I think content like it has a right to exist, and I personally found it incredibly entertaining. By the time of 2, cracks started to show. It's still a good game, definitely more mechanically deep than the original, but an effort was made to make a grander story with more defined characters, and I felt it often teetered into overly indulgent territory. You can only make me care so much about the phone-headed individuals and missing stock image children in a game where I can do unholy things to the fox. It definitely suffered from a bit of an identity crisis in its true ending, with campy dialogue and labored text crawls, where I often found myself glance at my metaphorical watch. At least by that point you can argue the game earned it. By 3, however, it's absolutely insufferable. All of that quirky comedy and satire towards the world of Fnaf games is entirely secondary to this bizarre, uninteresting plot surrounding characters I do not care about doing things that are totally unrelated to the previous style of game. I cannot express just how much I passionately do not care about the extended lore of the series. It baffles me whenever the game tries to take itself seriously given its context. The set dressing of the previous games with the goofy sound effects and music are simply incompatible with the gameplay direction, and it's one of the funniest unintentional jokes whenever phone guys' uhs are silenced in order to make the preceding 20-plus minute exposition dump feel more impactful. Like the developer himself knows it just doesn't fit in the game's world. I will never get over the fact that Shadow Dogger, a character who existed purely as a joke at the expense of people who took those kinds of characters too seriously, became this melodramatic asshat with a tragic backstory and immersive lore significance. It's a self-parody that plays itself completely straight. I know it may sound otherwise, but I do genuinely have a lot of respect for Direct Doggo. I fully understand his desire to take his games into a more unique direction, as well as allowing it to be a gateway into more serious game development. There's an obvious step up in production value with 3, and that's definitely something to be lauded. But for me, as production value goes up, my interest goes down, and just because I get it doesn't mean I have to like it. No shade to the people who do. I'm just here for the familiar black comedy visual novel that stole my heart, and I think 3 massively underdelivers in that respect. This is not what the Foxy of Arizona died for. Okay, so I actually partially agree with you, but let me start with what I don't agree with, and that's that Dayshift at Freddy's 2 was where crack started the show. I don't think that's the case. I think Dayshift at Freddy's 2 was the peak of the series, because it did have that deeper lore for people who were wanting to look for it, but if you didn't want to, you could just screw around. There were tons of endings, there was tons of stuff to do, tons of events that would happen, and you could totally just check out of the deeper story implications, and you didn't have to engage with them. But I personally did engage with them. I thought it worked well. It did at times get a little melodramatic, but I think the only time in the game that I felt it was a little too melodramatic was in that scene where the phone guy was lecturing us about all the kids who wouldn't go home to their families for Christmas because it went on a little too long. But I think that there are plenty of times where that more melodramatic tone actually hits, such as either with the phone guy or Dave when you're rigging the suit up to go off and you have that quiet, pensive moment. The moments where we get little dips into our main character's backstory. Not too far, but just enough that we know more about him. It does work, especially when it's building up on the first game, where there were some questions left over. There were people who were engaged with the story, and the story delivered. It said to everyone who took Dayshift at Freddy's seriously, you know what? I hear you. Here we go. And that's why I think when Dial Town came out, Dial Town actually has a very similar feel to Dayshift at Freddy's 2, where it has all this goofy, wacky stuff going on, and a main character who is basically just a more feral Dave. But it does have a lot of heart, and there are moments when the characters open up and reveal all the gory details. It does work, especially in a game that's a little different. I do like Dayshift at Freddy's 3, but the problem I personally have, I think Direct Doggo's great. I don't think the problem is that the story went in the direction of becoming more serious. I think it just was a little too intense on the seriousness, and that has to do with the exposition dumps, which you mentioned. That's why I kind of snickered a little when you mentioned that, because when I was replaying it to get some footage the last time I did, I realized there are times when the game just stops and decides it really wants to make sure you know the full seriousness of what's going on. And sometimes it works, and other times it does not. And times it doesn't is, okay, after the Golden Freddy boss fight, when you have to go through a long talk, or what feels like a long talk with him about that and him moving on and trying to coerce him to move on, that felt very, very hammer the nail. Another scene would be when you're talking to the phone guy and suddenly the main character, Jack, decides he's just gonna start talking about Dave's sad backstory, which anytime that Dave's sad backstory came out, it took me totally out of it, because Dayshift at Freddy's 2 revealed a bit about Dave's backstory, both how horrible he was and the terrible things he did, and some more of the sympathetic edge, like there's something bad happened to Dave. But Dayshift at Freddy's 3, it seems to be under the assumption, in a way, that the main character hasn't yet sympathized with Dave enough to see him as redeemable, unaware that almost all the fandom loves Dave so much that it doesn't matter what horrible stuff he did, they would be behind probably him redeeming no matter what. That's just how it is with characters, you know. the biggest issue with Dayshift at Freddy's 3 is the fact that the balance has shifted. In Dayshift at Freddy's 2, it's a lot of the wackiness. It's like, I'd say maybe 75% wackiness, and then 25% heartfelt. While in Dayshift at Freddy's 3, it's maybe about 60% heartfelt, 75% heartfelt, and 25% wackiness, because a lot of the Dayshift stuff has been cut massively back, and most of the game involves the flip side segment unless you do not go through the good ending at all. Which that is the main plot line, so you're going to do the good ending, because all the other endings that don't involve that are very short. Now, I do want to say one thing, and I might be misremembering this, but I think Direct Doggo mentioned he had trouble getting Dayshift at Freddy's 3 done. If I'm remembering this right, and he had so much trouble getting that game done because he just was having issues with it, we are fortunate we got the game at all. And I think for what it is really good. I do think that Dayshift at Freddy's 2 is better. But I don't think it's because of the heart. I think it's just a little bit of the balance. Teddy the Bear writes, I feel like Crying Child should have gotten way more screen time as a character. As far as we know, he's just a sin from Michael to start out Michael's redemption arc. But he's never been an actual character that has been fleshed out. He lived, he died to an animatronic, and now it's debated where he went on to go. I think it would have been better if Crying Child got a confirmed name like the rest of his family and went on to possess Golden Freddy or his Fredbear plush, or maybe even follow around Michael as a lost spirit. I just feel like Crying Child should have been more fleshed out rather than a one-off character. Love your videos, by the way. Thank you. And So, yes, I agree, but also, recently I've become a little more torn on this. Because it's very weird to have a major character, a main character who is often called back to, be as vague and seemingly detached as a Crying Child. But I sort of think this is one of those double-edged sword situations where it might be best that he is kept in obscurity. Because as Michael's out of the story, the only way the Crying Child could be looped back in is through Security Breach or Secret of the Mimic, which means robot or robot. And I think either would sort of damage FNAF 4's core story about a child in a tragically impossible situation. Though, yeah, I guess at this point, I'm also kind of torn on whether the Crying Child should get a name. It feels like he should absolutely have a name, but now it's kind of comical how many names he's gone through, so maybe we should just keep it a mystery. Yana Starlight writes, Secret of the Mimic's portrayal of Afton is the best he's been since FNAF 3. I'm not a big fan of how Sister Location kinda derailed his character, making him go from shady and mysterious killer to comically evil supervillain. In Secret of the Mimic, he's a slimy businessman, one that is ruthless and manipulative in a despisingly grounded way. And oh yeah, I agree, it's great. And you know what else? It fixes an issue with Fazbear Entertainment being this big evil company for no reason by making it work by Afton's rules. For so long we've sort of wondered, why does Fazbear Entertainment make such seemingly stupid decisions and do such reckless things? But that's because it lines up with William Afton himself, who has, for years, made some pretty questionable decisions just for his own glee. You can't tell me that killing off his business partner's child was a good strategic move in any case. And that goes double if he actually was behind the death of David. But I do like this businessman angle because it actually makes Afton seem a lot more intelligent than pretty much we've actually been able to see in the games. We know he killed a bunch of people and got away with it, but that's more because the police force in Hurricane sucks, as confirmed by the books. However, here he was able to basically manipulate someone, set them up, and then take everything they have. Something that we have attributed to William, but we have finally been able to see it in real time. Alimatronic DR writes, Scott and Steelwool were cruel for the secret ending of Secret of the Mimic, solely because it's probably not canon. What do you mean I can't take my new son home? It gets even worse, because the secret ending isn't even good by its own account. When I played through the secret ending, I was doing it with a friend of mine, and I think she was the one who pointed it out to me. But right after the mimic shuffles over to the bed and lays down and either goes to sleep or dies, hopefully he just goes to sleep, you hear a clunk noise come from somewhere. And it deceptively sounds like maybe someone coming inside. But I don't think that's what that is. I think that was the vent closing behind us. And if that's the case, with that vent closed, and with the door boarded up, and the window too high to climb down from, and the mimic asleep or possibly dead, Arnold's trapped and is probably going to die in there. I mean, there is a possibility that maybe Fazbear Entertainment will send the next batch of workers, and they'll come and they'll get their way up to the house and be able to get in there. But also, if at this point Murray's Costume Manor is already on fire, yeah, Arnold's not going to be in for a good time. Gabby Clown writes, "This is something that I've been wanting to get off my chest for a while, but I genuinely really liked the fort scene from the movie. I know it's goofy and ruins the horror, but I honestly think it makes the movie sadder because it really helps to show that these are just children trapped inside monsters, not mindless machines that jump scare you, and I think that's great." And honestly, I do too. So, I've mentioned this before, but in the early days of Fnaf, there was a lot of villainization of the ghost children, and that was because we didn't ever really get to see the ghost children as anything than just figures in a minigame. We were attached to characters like the phone guy, so when he gets killed by the animatronics, we're obviously kind of upset about it. And really, as the years have passed, we haven't seen much from the ghost children still. I mean, Susie is the only one who's gotten any characterization, and even Charlie, one of the most important murdered children, doesn't have anything substantial about her known in the games, besides her death. Considering that one of the main parts of the movie was that Abby sees them as her friends and that they are just children victims, having a scene like the fort scene was actually pretty important because it establishes that bond. I do, however, think where it comes in the story seems a little... So, obviously they couldn't have it happen at the end of the movie because of what happens. But a scene like that honestly feels like it would have worked better if it was at the very end of the movie. Like sort of one last night together before Mike, Abby, and Vanessa leave forever. But of course they couldn't do that because Vanessa was in the hospital. Well, I mean, Vanessa could have maybe not been there. She was kind of helping William Afton in a way. But I digress. Star Rat writes, "I feel like Eclipse should have had more screen time. He only spent like a couple of seconds, I think. Give my boy some screen time, Scott." Honestly, so there was a hot take. There's another hot take I saved, but I didn't use it for this video for some reason, and I'm not sure why. But in that hot take, they said, instead of Roxy saving Cassie in Ruin, it should have been Eclipse. It would have made more sense that he would be the one to swoop in because Roxy would have had to get herself out from under the forklift and stuff like that. And you know what? Now with Secret of the Mimic out, that is especially true. Because you would think Roxy is Cassie's favorite. What does the Eclipse have to do with the Mimic? Well, actually, apparently the Sun and Moon have a lot to do with the Mimic. We just don't know what it is. Sun and Moon motifs are all over Murray's Costume Manor. There was a moon suit mascot in Murray's Costume Manor. Someone became the Sun and Moon, whatever that's supposed to mean, and the Sun and Moon stood in for Edwin and Fiona Fiona and Edwin in the Moon.exe minigame. Not to mention that the burning carousel, which seems to relate to Fiona's death at Fall Fest, features, once again, the daycare attendant. So technically, if Eclipse dropped in and had a spar with Mimic, it would have actually held a lot more significance in the overall lore. It just wouldn't have related to Cassie directly, except for the fact that she had saved him earlier. But also, yeah, I hope the Eclipse comes back, at least for Ruin. Or, no, at least for Abyss, if that turns out to really be a thing. Morning Dusk writes, "The week before didn't answer anything that couldn't have been answered by being about Ralph's day shift week when William was a night guard in Fnaf 2. Plus, we would have gotten a bunch of clarification in one of the games that needs more clarity around it. Not disparaging one of the better choose-your-own-adventure FNAF books, but how much did it really give us other than Phoneguy's name and more fodder for when FNAF 1 happens? Honestly, I agree. My main problem with The Week Before is that it's not a bad book, but I feel like, in contrast to VIP, there wasn't as much to do because you've got 4 animatronics, and Golden Freddy counting him, in a singular location that we're already familiar with, and basically one guy just trying to fight them off. It doesn't have as many opportunities to do some interesting stuff with it. Like, imagine a scene where Balloon Boy steals his batteries and runs into a vent, and then whoever we're playing as gets the option to crawl after Balloon Boy or just give up on it. And if he crawls after him, there's a chance of him getting stuck in the vent and getting killed, or if he goes, like, through a different vent, he can escape, or if he stays in the office, he's killed by something. And that's not to say The Week Before is a bad book. It certainly isn't. It's actually, like you said, one of the best choose-your-own-adventures. The first 2 were the good ones. But having it take place at FNAF 2's location, or even the location before FNAF 2, would have given us a lot more of interesting stuff to read about. Captain E.T. writes, 1. Charliebot is good. I really like Charliebot because it gives Charlie more depth in her character and backstory. I'm personally not bothered by but how did Charlie do this and that? No, I actually quite like this because it lets me have fun interpretations. I may be biased because I accidentally spoiled myself before I read the Silver Eyes trilogy, and I prefer sci-fi over horror. However, I do wish that it's executed better. Maybe if they made the 4th book where Charlie learned to accept herself as a robot. I personally believe in the theory that it was Charlie at the end of the book and that she is still alive in Baby's body, or they merge together, which I disagree with the whole Charlie is weird but Red is perfect. Red is clearly not perfect, and Charlie isn't weird, nor did she become perfect at the end. And it would have been too late to make a 4th book, but at this time, Charlie could have learned to accept herself as a robot, and maybe only her friends would know. The antagonist is the trickiest part, and maybe Sammy could come back in a way his character matters. And see Robo-Charlie and real Sammy interact. Would be interesting to see Sammy hate Robo-Charlie and Robo-Charlie doing something. Fanfic aside, I think most people misinterpret Charliebot wrong. Charlie Emily is not just a robot. She's a robot who is also an agony being made from Henry's emotions, ignoring how Henry created life, but emotion is a major thing in FNAF still. Charlie Emily may not be the real Charlie, but she isn't some mindless robot because we've seen her think, dream, have feelings, which makes her compelling to me. There were also some bits where I went, look at this robot doing human things, because I knew about the Charliebot before I read the trilogy, and that probably affected my biases. One more thing, I don't think Charlie's age was a retcon. I think her human self was born in 1980, but Henry made Charliebot think that she was born much earlier. One more thing again, I probably mentioned this later on, but I don't care that the character isn't related to the games. Like, yeah, she's a puppet in game, and I'm fine with her not being puppet here or that Charlie actually moved on. This is implied in the rest of the trilogy and the 4th closet. This is a different continuity where they don't need to be the same as the game. I agree. Definitely believe if the 4th closet spent less time with Charlie passed out on the floor and not wanting to show much of her, and instead spent more time with her discovering herself, if it was all about her as the main character discovering herself as a robot, that would have made the twist a lot more impactful, because instead of it just being something dropped by Circus Baby at the end of the book, it could be something that she slowly discovers, finds out about halfway through, and then has to process her feelings about. And then her sort of sacrifice at the end would have more weight to it. The problem with Charliebot is solely in execution. That's why in the first book Charlie is a person, and in the second she's wacky, and in the third one all of the life is drained out of her and funneled into trying to work in the baby aspect. The problem wasn't Charlie being a robot, but how they began to treat their main character once she became nothing but the robot twist. Also, the ending. Recently rereading the ending segment has sort of opened my eyes to something. I won't get into it now, but I do wish I would have reread and remembered it before I made my big Charlie video. 2. The 4th closet baby isn't bad or cancer. I actually quite like the character despite her flaws. I find her to be an interesting, good character because I like her backstory, personality, also she's a germaphobe, which is funny to me, and motivation, which is to be loyal to William because she wants attention and is arguably the main reason she is acting like Charlie. Though I think she might have genuinely liked hanging out with Charlie's friends, plus she possibly had a crush on John because she moved her hair while John asked her on a date, though that's more of her headcanon. Basically, she wants attention from her father, which results in her horrible actions. To be honest, I wish that she had an arc where she and Green Charlie fought against Afton. And about the elephant in the room of why she is disliked by a lot of people, hear me out. She probably heard Carlton talking about her, and then later she tried using that to her advantage, which failed. I like her circus baby graphic novel design too. She can look funny and expressive. And I think they went overboard with her kissing John in the third act. Also, what if she mentally grew up? We see her acting older and stuff. Plus, she was raised by William for however long she's been alive in the fourth closet. But the reason for the MCI nod is because they were treated as kids and they were stuck as animatronics with barely any awareness. Elizabeth, however, knew she was Charlie Baby and was raised by William, like while Henry was making her and once William had her and after she got freed from the closet. Unfortunately, I do agree that her rivalry with Charlie wasn't that deep and felt shallow. I don't know what else to comment about her, so if you have anything to add you want my opinion on about, tell me in the reply section. I forgot to do that. Oh, and I could be wrong, but I think she wore normal outfits in the novels. Maybe I'm just coping. If she only wore the red dress in the fourth closet novel, then that's just stupid. So, I'm very torn up on the fourth closet baby now, having reread the books. I know I've been critical of the fourth closet baby because of the whole sexy baby thing, but having refreshed myself on the book, I can say without a doubt that I definitely got sidetracked by the short skirts and the numerous times they call her elegant and graceful. Rereading the original novel, baby is a hard stick in a lot of places because a large part of her characterization and her thought process and thinking is actually a giant red herring towards the beginning of the book. She doesn't really have much of a fleshed out character. It originally establishes her as having one, but the further you get into the story, the phonier it gets. And I realize that having directly compared my I read it 5 years ago, the fourth closet experience to the graphic novel, which absolutely does seem to go into a more sympathetic baby who has more liveliness and characterization. While in the fourth closet, Baby is a merciless killer who screams about jealousy while also spending most of the book smirking and dead-faced. You get the feeling of characterization, but there comes a time in the book when she becomes mask off, and it feels like she masked off so hard that she stripped herself of the characterization they were trying to build. Also, shockingly enough, she's not a germaphobe. It's established in the surgery scene that the reason that she's constantly washing herself off is because she's afraid of infecting Afton, so it's more a fear of infecting him, not a fear of germs in general. And yes, she does actually wear other clothes other than the dress, but she does wear the skin-tight red dress for a few scenes, and elsewise she wears a low-cut red shirt with a short black skirt. I can't remember if it was mentioned to be a mini. And then long combat boots, except the heels. In fact, Carlton calls her out on this. I feel like my opinion of Fourth Closet Baby is actually worse for having reread the novel. Everything I remembered about the Fourth Closet that I softened up on with the graphic novel, yeah, no, I think my first read-through on Baby was sort of on point. The graphic novel just fixed a lot of it, including the ending. 3. The Mimic is overhated. The Fnaf fandom hated when William came back, and they also hated it when Ruin showed it was actually the Mimic. But I do wish that the Mimic was more fleshed out and has more screen time in Ruin. I think people just don't like the Mimic because they prefer William. Thankfully, Secret of the Mimic fixed book problems because we're not required to read the books, plus he is now fleshed out. Also, Secret of the Mimic thankfully proved that Mimic isn't going to steal anyone's role, though I think he took inspiration from William's killing. The only person I can see this happening with is Henry, but only in terms of making the main animatronics. Not with being William's partner, Fredbear founder, being the father of Charlie and creator of the puppet. I really liked the Mimic gameplay in Secret of the Mimic. It's actually really suspenseful and made me panic. I'm glad they cooked with him. Sorry if my comment was off, it was originally made before Secret of the Mimic, plus I tried working on it as it was made before Secret of the Mimic. No problem, I gotcha. The Mimic is a strange creature because when the books came out, it seemed like everyone loved him, and now there's a lot of folks who don't really like him as much. I'm not sure what exactly it was that made them flip. I can say I flipped in the opposite direction. I didn't really like the Mimic when it came to the books, and my greatest frustration was that you had to read the books to understand who this guy was. This was totally fixed by Secret of the Mimic, and not only that, it was fixed very well because in Secret of the Mimic, we see almost all of the Mimic's backstory. We see pretty much everything we need to know except for what happened after Secret of the Mimic. And honestly, I think one of the things that really sold it for me was the fact that the Mimic wasn't just some random mimic of David that Edwin cooked up. No, he thought this was Fiona and he rebuilt her as the Mimic. And then the Mimic eventually shedded this personality. I think, well, one of them did. I think that was a really neat addition. And even though I didn't have like a gasp, I can't believe it reaction when I saw that in Secret of the Mimic, I definitely felt that. And I don't know why, but something about that scene something about that scene made me like the backstory better. But the thing that actually flipped me on the Mimic was the scene up in the attic when you're listening. So you listen to this tape, and it's the Mimic using Edwin's voice. Now, a lot of YouTubers I've seen had this spoiled for them because they used subtitles. I didn't use subtitles. So when I started it, I thought it was Edwin because his voice doesn't start glitching out until Edwin starts talking. The charred remains of Edwin possibly sitting outside the window are talking. And that was so effective because the amount of sinister bitterness that the Mimic spits when he's saying Edwin's lines to David back to him, it's just so good. And because of that, I like the Mimic now. That being said, I can see why other people might be torn on the Mimic. I think it's the part where Mimic starts mimicking Afton, where it starts splitting hairs, and also, as we heard earlier through another hot take, the sort of feeling of Edwin overtaking Henry's role. I think that's where the Mimic kind of becomes more divisive than they already were when he appeared in the books. Moving on. I like Phasgoo. I want to eat Phasgoo. Do not eat the Phasgoo, please. Can confirm it does not taste like Play-Doh. 5. I could care less about horror in Fnaf. Okay, that was a bit exaggerated, but the only horror I somewhat care about are the ways the book characters died and some gameplay like Secret of the Mimic. At least the first time. I just want to say I don't care about horror in Fnaf. I care about horror, but it's not like a huge thing for me because frankly, I can't remember the last time anything genuinely scared me. I was kind of creeped out by the Bendy Scarecrow thing, but I consider the scares I get from mascot horror to be more like, ooh, it's gonna get me. It's kind of like when you're going through a haunted house. I don't get actually genuinely scared. And I can't remember the last time I was genuinely scared by a game. I think Into Vivo really creeped me out. But when it comes to FNAF trying to be scary, FNAF has a very specific style of horror. And I don't think it's easy to compare it to other horror games because they don't always line up the same way. Like, FNAF's not going to be scary in the same way something like the older Silent Hill games were. 6. Fazbear Entertainment Corporation is my favorite FNAF villain to date due to the books. Fright's Tales, I love their heinous acts. You know, if it was revealed that Fazbear Entertainment was being run by Old Sport, it would make so much sense. I don't really have much to say on it, though. 7. I probably enjoy reading the books over playing the games. Admittedly, I have not played Help Wanted 1, Freddy in Space 2, 3, and Furry Rage. I guess maybe it's because I more so play the FNAF games for sake of playing it. FNAF 1 is a fine game, but it fell off in the later nights because the strategy gets very repetitive. FNAF 2, I've actually played the whole game, including 1020, and it sucks, gameplay-wise. FNAF 3, I plan on beating Aggressive Nightmare soon. FNAF 4, I suck at the gameplay. I last made it past night 6. It seems like you don't suck that bad if you made it past night 6. Sister Location, the gameplay itself can be fine, but I'm currently fighting Ennard and it's not fun. FNAF 6, same reason for 4, though I do like the simulation part. Ultimate Custom Night might be one of the funnest from the main games. I don't feel like typing for Ultimate Custom Night. Security Breach was good in gameplay, and the second time too, surprisingly, though it's not that revolutionary. And for Ruin, it's good, but the mask camera puzzle can be repetitive. I will say that Into the Pit is arguably the best one gameplay-wise, though maybe after I'm fully done playing Secret of the Mimic, it might be my favorite. I don't know if I actually like reading more than playing games, but it depends on what I'm playing and reading. To be honest, this feels more like an excuse to make some quick reviews. Also, FNAF 3 Troll Demo is peak. Well, maybe you do. Some people just enjoy reading over playing the games. But it could also be the games that you're comparing it to, because between you and me, some of the older games I don't have that much fun with. FNAF 4, I've mentioned, I have a huge amount of trouble with. I liked Sister Location, but some of it can be a little... Night 4. Though I don't know if I would say that I enjoy reading the books over playing the games, because, like you, there are games that I really enjoy. I really like Help Wanted 2. I think it's goofy fun. I liked Into the Pit a lot. I think it's more on a book-to-game basis. There are some books you might enjoy reading more than some games you might enjoy playing, if that came out sensical at all. 8. I have been playing a lot of FNAF World, and it might be my favorite FNAF game. The music is really good. I like the silliness, the character designs, and gameplay, though I wish it had more depth, but I have a way of playing by switching a character after they die. For example, if Chica dies, I switch to Foxy. It may make my team not OP with stuff like Funtime, Foxy, and JJ in the same team, but it keeps things fresh at times. Though I suck at Freddy in Space because I'm a console player, not a PC player. The Foxy.exe was something, and the Star Fox one was neat and cool with the actual voice lines, but soon I will suffer from the Great Mighty Rainbow, who I definitely did not take inspiration of insulting people while I was in a dunk tank. Okay, I gotta hear the story behind that. But also, FNAF World is a pretty good game. It actually is really fun, and it sounds like basically what you're doing is a Nuzlocke that I've seen people do before, and that is a really cool way to shake it up so that you keep rotating through the characters. So I agree. 10. I preferred Fortnite x FNAF over DBD x FNAF. In terms of silliness and how I would combine FNAF characters with other fictional characters as a combo and make them do dumb stuff. We would have had Freddy wearing Jordans while emoting with Godzilla. I'm into games with collabs, like LEGO Dimensions. By the way, shout out to LEGO Dimensions. I get that it wouldn't fit, but FNAF has had goofy stuff already. It may not be as goofy as Withered Chica teaming up with LeBron James with a skibbity toilet backing and Michael Meyer while going against MasterChef with an Among Us backling and Bender, but I'm fine with goofy collabs. Though DBD is objectively better because we got actual lore for William, so I'm glad with what we got. So I currently don't play either game, so I really don't have strong feelings either way, technically. So there is kind of pros and cons on both. Putting FNAF in Fortnite would allow a lot of people to get access to the characters. There's a lot of kids who love FNAF. We went over that earlier, and now they would be in Fortnite. They'd be recognizable characters. They could play as them. But also, on the other hand, if it does seem kind of in recent times like FNAF is kind of trying to edge its brand image in a little more. It's trying to come back into more like a horror space. It's taking itself a little more seriously, at least with like the movies. So having a Fortnite collab at the same time that the movies are coming out would kind of maybe be some mixed branding. There's also the control aspect. See, there's a big difference between FNAF getting into Fortnite and Springtrap getting into Dead by Daylight. By having Springtrap get into Dead by Daylight alone, basically there was a lot more control over what got in and how it affected the lore. We have a singular character getting in, manage the voice lines, manage the skins, manage the map, there you go. It's not like you get them into the game and then you have to constantly micromanage and you have to maybe fixate a little more because there's multiple characters. That could also be a thing. I think that Dead by Daylight did probably do a little heavy lifting on FNAF's brand image, especially for a horror brand. But that being said, I don't think FNAF, shouldn't be in Fortnite. I think it probably could, and I think it probably, maybe, still will. But I think going by Dead by Daylight first was probably a good pull. 11. Not sure if this is actually considered a hot take, but Funtime Freddy with Bonbon is peak design. However, Funtime Freddy without Bonbon is not peak design. Yes, I'm talking about design, and no, I'm not thinking about Count the Ways Funtime Freddy. I don't think that's a hot take at all. In fact, I don't think many people who haven't read the books know that there's a version of Funtime Freddy without Bonbon. And really, Bonbon is a huge part of Freddy's draw. Sure, there's his wicked voice and sadistic demeanor, but that tag team duo mechanic helped Funtime Freddy stand out beyond just being a plated Freddy. And the whole, "Hey Bonbon" line has become pretty recognizable as a Fnaf meme. Without Bonbon, Freddy can stand on his own 2 feet, but it's not the same without the little guy. Or girl. 12. Scrap Baby is my favorite character who originated from Pizzeria Simulator. Technically the Freddy Files. I find her design to be my favorite animatronic design. Actually, maybe not because Charliebot has such peak drip, but I don't know who has better drip. I love Scrap Baby's claw, her roller skates, withered parts, and realistic hair. Her speech was odd at the end, and that should have gone to Molten Freddy instead. I really liked the intro cutscene where Scrap Baby is there. I genuinely did not know what to do there, which is rare because I usually have an idea of what to do due to me playing FNAF games in recent years. I also like the lore piece that she rebuilt herself. That's very cool to me. Also, I don't think she did a sudden switch because I think Baby loved her father and sister location. Maybe Elizabeth's side took over, or she knew it was Michael? Okay, I have a confession. Despite Circus Baby being my favorite, I don't know my interpretation of her. But basically, I don't mind the sudden change. There's also a theory where she thought Henry was William, and that's what her end voice line was about. But the best part about Scrap Baby is that I can abuse her in Ultimate Custom Night. I love abusing robots with issues. Well, it's easy, there's a lot of them in this series. But oh yes, Scrap Baby looks incredible. That sort of busted mimicry, wanting to resemble a clown and wanting to resemble a girl, and instead coming out looking like a broken doll. It's so cool. The claw, the dummy mouth, the colors, the way that the wire hair has highlights through having different wires mixed in, it's super neat. And I love that Help Wanted 2 brought her back. And not only that, while they only had her crawling, that kind of fills in the blank on how she would have looked if Pizzeria Simulator had animations. Wish we got more of her. And as for whether Baby knew or not, in Sister Location, unless Michael is wrong and unless she believed Michael longed for her as much as her father did, she did at one point truly believe he was William. So take that as you will, but why she changed her mind and why she got the speech like she did is absolutely a nod to the books. 13. I should reread the Silver Eyes novels before I say this take, but I prefer Charlie's personality in sequels over the Silver Eyes. I understand that she made a few dumb decisions in those books, however, I don't remember what happened in the Silver Eyes. I mean, she did go through a character arc, but I don't remember her characteristics that much in the first book. And about sequel Charlie being dumb, I can only think of her randomly sleeping in that house was a stupid decision, and I was puzzled to why she was doing this. I guess to be bait, but what's the point? Plus, she got out of the spring locks while in Twisted Freddy got Springtrap to just jump on the sharp things in the caves. Again, I want to reread the Silver Eyes trilogy, but I prefer the sequel right now. I also just think Silver Eyes is too slow for me, and I feel the Fourth Closet, the Twisted Ones, is much faster paced. Sorry, my friend, but time to disagree big time. My biggest issue is the execution. In the Silver Eyes, we get a very clear picture of who Charlie is. Someone who has had it together for years and now has to confront her trauma, but doesn't feel comfortable to grieve because of her stunted childhood with the emotionally unavailable Aunt Jin. But it's not her entire character. She's a little awkward, but she's also goofy. She has a resilience that comes from practical places, such as her time as a Girl Scout, yet she's not exactly tough either. She's not unshakable. In fact, Freddy's leaves her pretty shaken. But her arc is about confronting her past and finding closure. And finding out the secrets that have been hidden for so many years. All thrown out by the Twisted Ones, by the way, where Charlie becomes so obsessed with it that almost all of her internal dialogue repetitious of it, in servitude to the plot. For example, Charlie kinda doesn't care about John asking her out because she's too busy thinking over and over again about the same things about her obsessions with Sammy, the door, the robots. It turns her from a fleshed out character to something much more poorly strung. And then the Fourth Closet, well, when she is awake, she ain't reacting to anything at all, to the point where she virtually just mostly gives up by the end. Or the plot gives up on her. And as for the pacing, no, having reread it, so the Silver Eyes first half is mostly quieter, yes, but the Twisted one spends a lot of its time in repetition. There are like 3 different segments when she's at school, there's 3 different segments where she meets up with John and nothing really happens, there's 3 segments where she meets up with Burke and she finds bodies. There's stuff going on, but it's very disjointed because it feels like the plot starts moving and then it kind of jumps back to the first point again. While the Silver Eyes is a steady pace. And the Fourth Closet is also weird because it does take maybe, I would say, having recently reread it, I reread the Fourth Closet, it takes maybe about, I remember I made a note, it was either 3 or 4 chapters before it actually started moving. And the biggest problem with the Fourth Closet is, I don't know what they were thinking of during the end, but having it flip chapter to chapter from, here's a chapter of Charlie and John, stops abruptly, or goes back to everyone at Circus Babies, feels very jarring when you're trying to read it. So you end up reading it really fast because you're like, okay, can we settle up one of these plot lines? And then the ending is very fast for both plot lines. But the Carlton one wraps up a little bit better. But, hey, that's how it goes. 14. Billy is my favorite character from Tales. I really liked the first depressing story, and I liked that he got an actual ending in B7, too. I thought he was going to die in typical book fashion. I'm so glad for my boy that he got an actual happy ending. B7 left a very sour taste in my mouth due to some of the plot elements, so if any of the Fazbear Fright stories were going to get a continuation fix to rewrite the ending, I'm glad it's that one. While I don't have too much attachment to Billy, I think it's great that he didn't get done dirty. 15. Not a hot take, but the Fazvengers from Return to the Pizzaplex was funny, but I was annoyed because there was no actual endings with them and only game over. Still funny that Chip went, Oswald, I'm making a team, Nick Fury style. I did not know about this. But that's really funny. Really funny reference for people who are going to pick it up, and since the Avengers is pretty popular, people are probably going to pick it up. 16. I think Baby is in main control of Ennard. Mostly because if she wasn't, then that makes her character less important. Oh yeah, definitely agree. The whole body went kaput the second she left, so it makes a lot of sense that she was the one steering the ship. And it also explains why Ennard switched masks the second that Baby left. She had the clown mask for her, and then the second they switched to Molten Freddy, whatever was left of Ennard turned into a Freddy. 17. Everything has missed potential in Fnaf. That's why I don't care that much about missed potential. I do care some, but not everything like everyone seems to be. Yeah, I'll agree. Not everything that has missed potential has actual missed potential, but I will say there are some things that are, like, kind of egregious, and the one that comes to mind immediately is poor Monty. Monty has gotten shafted at every avenue. The most recent case being in the 3rd Choose Your Own Adventure book, Escape the Pizzaplex, where he's on the cover, but it's not really featured in the book. I mean, he's there, but he's just there. 18. The retcon isn't a big deal to me because I believe that Scott retcons a bunch of other things too. Okay, fair point. 19. Hating on a story, character, plot point just because it spawned a bunch of dumb theories itself is dumb in my opinion. One of the examples being Charliebot. Aside from the poor execution, what happened in the Fourth Closet, I feel like Charliebot is hated because it spawned the theories like Gregbot and the whole X character can be a robot. Why not like a story, character, plot point as their own thing? Basically, why not like stuff on as their own thing? Also, if you were going to mention B7 as a robo-kid, he never was a robot, and only thought he was one and got prosthetics, but never became a robot. The idea of robot kids from the fandom made me think Astrid from Nexie was going to be a robot at some point, but it was really about a spoiled kid who sucks. I'm sorry, that one took me a little off guard. Oh man. I will say the robot kid thing has become like... You know, it's funny. Charlie was the only person who was revealed to be a robot so far, yes? Because B7 wasn't. But if this is the case, why on earth is the one character who's most associated with being robot children the crying child? I mean, the crying child is actually Gregory, who's a robot. The crying child is actually David, who was the mimic who turned into a robot and then became Gregory. It's crazy. That thing spawned a dozen theories. But again, as you know, my problem with the whole robot reveal is just the execution. It doesn't have to do with the theory spawned after it. I can't really think of a plot point that spawned theories that the plot point itself was the problem. 20. Charlie's friends are underrated, and I think most of them peaked in the fourth closet. Jessica was essentially the second main character, arguably the first main character because of her amount of screen time and impact. Like seeing William, I got this name from CrossCorp64, and Baby. She saved the missing kids from Mangle and Funtime Freddy, and you could probably count her finding Charlie and spying on Red Charlie. Carlton told Red Charlie to go to the gym. Hell, yeah, I remember that. Helped with the missing kids and the original missing kids by going in the spirit world and got them to stop William permanently, and perhaps gain immortality. Marla helped Charlie and missing kids. As for the Twisted Ones, the Silver Eyes, I surprisingly really liked Jason. I thought he was going to be a generic brat who just plays games, but he has actually contributed to the story in a good way. Lamar is an Afton, and that is a 100% fact. I liked that he helped Jason. It's really funny and smart that he didn't go back to Hurricane Utah because of what happened, unlike everyone else. Carlton knowing about Freddy and Damal getting kidnapped by Afton but still joking around while taking some of it seriously. I don't remember what major thing Jessica did in the Silver Eyes aside from her saying Bonnie was her therapist and maybe with helping the animatronics moving. However, she did have a role in the Twisted Ones by being Charlie's roommate. Helping take down the Twisted Ones and finding Charlie. I forgot. Anyways, you might have noticed that I haven't talked about one major character that is widely disliked, and that is John. I didn't include him because he's bad, but because I want to attempt to defend bro. You better try hard. I'm listening. Though Jessica, Jason, Carlton are better than him. In the Silver Eyes, he kind of was just there. We were told that he was sarcastic. I recently went on the TV Tropes page, switched to the Twisted Ones, and it said that John was being sarcastic by saying it's a movie about zombies, when I assumed Charlie was asking about what the movie was about. So, not that bland like everyone says, but still kind of bland here. However, I would say he peaked in the fourth closet when we see his personal life at the construction site, coping by talking to Theodore and stuff like that. Wish there was a better reason of how he knew Red was fake. Something I did see while Red and Green John were fighting, John kept getting punched and fell, but he kept getting up. I think he stopped at some point, but the point is he's committed to getting back up despite being punched by a metal woman. So he's not as bland as everyone says, in my opinion. Certainly not the most interesting, unlike his crush Charlie. One more thing, I want to see a Silver Eyes trilogy movie, live action or animated. Maybe that would make them likable. Also, Charliebot is cinema. I agree, for the most part. And originally, I had a very lengthy explanation for my feelings towards each character, but I've actually had a very overdue video on Charlie's friends, so I'm going to hold back and instead be brief. Jessica has the best character arc of side character who doesn't do much to becoming one of the biggest characters in the books, and one of the most well-written ones. Carlton is the comic relief that instead of screwing stuff up, gets stuff done, and really is one of the best characters period due to his mix of goofiness and effectiveness. Marla is very sweet, and I like how they build that into making her a nurse. And I like how despite Jessica sort of becoming Charlie's default best friend, Marla is the one who Charlie's been in contact with for over the years. And it kind of shows in their interactions, especially in the first book. Lamar is unfortunate, because I thought his relationship with Marla was kinda cute, but there he goes. Same with Jason, who, like you said, wasn't an annoying kid character. And John is very wise and sarcastically witty for a 2x4. I've got a great joke about John that I'm saving for later. But we'll leave it there. Now, our next hot take is from a familiar face, or voice. Let's welcome back the unnamed security guard with his newest hot take. And be sure to check out his video of it as well. Links in the description. Take it away.
Hi everyone. It feels good to do one of these hot takes again, and despite having months to think of a good one for the next video, I came up with this one in the last week during a live stream with the help of a viewer called @glitchstinger on YouTube. Which, if you are interested, I'm going to start streaming open panel discussions about Fnaf lore, so feel free to hop on when you see one in the future, because this is the most fun I've ever had in theory discussions. Now, with that shameless self-padding out of the way, on to the hot take, and rather than build up the suspense to the hot take itself, It feels like it would be more fun to throw it out right at the beginning, like jumping into a cold pool, so here it is. Phone Guy was the turncoat who told William and Henry about M2. Oh boy, grab the milk, because I bet that one was spicy. The annoying kind of spicy that lingers too, because like all good hot takes, you can't just throw out crazy ideas willy-nilly. No, the best hot takes are the ones that aren't outright provable, but have just enough evidence to be entirely possible. Now, if you really want the nitty-gritty on my full thoughts on this subject, you can go to my recent Dead by Daylight stream number 35 and skip to 6:07:44 and listen to the end where Glitch and I were talking about this in depth. But for the sake of keeping this submission brief, I will condense the conclusions we came to. First off, I would point out that in the staff contacts email written by William where he is talking about how he wants the Murray staff contact info and is willing to, quote, sweeten a deal, already made by also offering a manager position at one of the new franchise locations, it is notable that William never refers to this turncoat by name. But keep the idea that whoever he is talking to was offered a management position at a Freddy's in mind. Next, looking at Ralph specifically, from what I have seen, he is only mentioned in 2 of the emails, and I double-checked all of the audio logs, and there is no mention of Ralph in any of them. The 2 emails that for sure mention Ralph by name is group chat number 5 and theater, one more injury. In the group chat number 5 email, he says, quote, anyone notice that the door locks now? What are we supposed to do? Sleep here? These group chat emails are a way for Murray employees to discreetly complain about various problems throughout the facility, or how the company is being run, as discussed in the first 2 group chat emails. Ralph, being a part of this group chat, would imply to me that he also has a bone to pick with MCM or Edwin himself. To further add to this, we can look at one other email that mentions him by name. In theater, one more injury, an unnamed employee mentions that, quote, Ralph went to the hospital last night. That suit is going to be the death of us. One more injury, and I'm out of here. I mean it this time. Now, it's a bit of an extrapolation on my part, but I suspect it was the pirate captain suit that had malfunctioned which hurt Ralph. As in the Nurse Dolly intro cutscene, she mentions that, quote, this isn't your first visit to the service hospital. Either way, the point that on top of his complaint about the locking doors, he apparently also had to be sent to the hospital after a possible spring lock failure would give him plenty of motivation to turncoat. But wait, I can hear you say, how do we know that this Ralph is Phone Guy? Well, despite how the books are looked at now post Secret of the Mimic with much less importance, I do find it notable that the one time we are ever given a name for Phone Guy in any continuity was in the interactive novel the week before, released just a year ago, in which his name was Ralph. So, to quickly sum all this up, Ralph, along with many other employees, were growing increasingly frustrated with MCM and Edwin, as he sees others like Stan and his partner steal what they can and leave to do their own ventures. Ralph is approached by William Afton and offered not just a job, but a manager's position at this new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurant, in exchange for the employee contacts list for MCM. Ralph, deciding to go above and beyond, does this and also informs William and Henry about M2, which not only gave them the motivation to not just siphon off talent from MCM, but the desire to completely take over MCM after Edwin refuses to share the blueprints for M2 with them, as heard in this audio tape.
Project update. I figured it out. There's a leak. Someone told them about M2. Well, they can't have it. Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time. But it did. It's just not ready.
This sets into motion all of the events that come later, including his own death. On top of that, we would see Ralph demoted, most likely by Henry after the MCI, to be managing the security staff by Fnaf 2, and lastly, demoted again to a lowly security guard by Fnaf 1, likely for his employee being bitten in the bite of 87. So, that's my hot take. Trying my best to keep this brief, but feel free to follow if you like, and more theories and live streams coming soon. Thank you again, Not Real Name, for including my hot take, and I look forward to seeing what you and everyone else thinks.
Now this might be disappointing because it's always spicier when I have a counter suggestion, but I absolutely agree with this, and I think this is the case. And in fact, let me add on a few extra details to support that case. 1. While names are reused often in FNAF, Ralph is not. The closest would be Ralpho the Rabbit from Fazbear Fright, but in a series where a lot of characters do have repeated names, Ralph really isn't one of them. 2. Scott did vouch that the week before was real, or was canon, so Ralph is pretty much canonically confirmed by the creator himself to be Phone Guy's name. And Scott also had a writing credit on Secret of the Mimic, so he was there. And 3, a lot of people think Henry was the turncoat, but that actually doesn't make much sense if you really think about it. For that to work, especially in this email, Henry would have had to have been working at MCM and Fredbear's at the same time. Edwin would have had to have considered him a friend despite his detachment and disinterest in his employees, and when he said that this is the last project I'll ever do for them, he would have somehow both failed to mention that Henry was a former employee who was shifting over to William, and implied he was directly working for them. And most importantly, this would mean that William, the fraudster, built Fredbear's alone and then poached Henry later, because Fredbear's Family Diner was already up and going. From what we can see, the time that WA was actually poaching employees came towards the end of MCM's lifespan, right when they were making the new Freddy's in the basement, not the diner. So, he would have had to have poached Henry, and then hired Edwin on to work for him, and then, not only that, he would have had to have made Henry a manager, not an inventor? The simplest answer is usually the right one, and the phone guy's name just happened to make it in the Secret of the Mimic, and the phone guy has, in the past, played a role that sounded very similar to a manager, one who is smoothing things for the higher-ups, but might be in a higher position of power. Great to hear from you again, and I hope you have another smoking hot take for the next video. Alright, now it's time for my hot take, and I had a hard time choosing one this time. There's so many. There's like the Office gameplay debate. There is the whole Sun and Moon thing. I was gonna do one on the Silver Eyes trilogy's ending, but then I decided maybe that's too vague and nitpicky, and the Sun and Moon thing I already did, so there's the fourth ending of Secret of the Mimic, the cut one where the Mimic becomes Edwin. Yeah, should have totally been left in. It would have been totally cool. But that's a hot take, considering that Edwin himself is a walking hot take. Here we go. Here's a real juicy one. Already ate Chica is fine, and I won't have anyone slander her any longer. I'm putting my foot down today. Now, who is Already ate Chica, you may ask? She is the second boss in the factory level of Freddy in Space 2. She is a large, overly stuffed chicken relaxing after a big meal until you show up. But I've seen plenty of negative comments about her. I even had people suggesting she was fan art when I featured her in a thumbnail, not in a positive way. But really, there's nothing wrong with Already ate Chica. Her round cheeks are sweet, and her bib matches what we might expect. She even has a little tail. Just because she belches up trash and has been eating a lot of red eye heels and bones, that doesn't make her, oh my god, she ate novel, baby.